Hello.
Aloha.
Aloha. Nice to see everybody. Just as usual, feel free to take a little look around, see who's with us so far today. Hmm. Hmm. Well, it'll just be Steve and I today. Michelle is on an airplane right now over to visit Steve for a couple days, so she's with us in the meta fields. So, all right, well, let's get started for our sitting. So, finding your way into your seated posture, taking your time to do it carefully, to be gentle, and sometimes this harshness of differentiating our practice from the rest of our lives. You come to let the eyes close, just seeing as quickly as you can the sense of just continuity. Yes, there is a shift, an ability to invite perhaps some different qualities of attention and direct them in ways that are unique, but at the same time, seeing that this flow of mind and body continues on, conditions the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. Nothing inherently different about our experience seated with our eyes closed, but without the call of our attention towards the external tasks and external world so much. There is a sense that we can start to receive these comings and goings with a little more mindfulness, clarity, tenderness, letting go to the degree we can of any agenda we might have for these next moments, and finding footing instead in the desire to see more clearly, to understand more fully. these phenomena that we can observe directly. Hearing phenomena, smelling, tasting, seeing, touching, phenomena of mind, of knowing, of emotion, of views and attitude. Not needing to conjure anything or make anything happen. And trusting that we can come to know these experiences more closely. And in that knowing of truths about their nature, be clarified or revealed in ways that are liberating, transformative to the habit patterns of mind and body. And it can be helpful sometimes to keep that simplicity of awareness of that which is material and that which is mental. Material, of course, there's the body and our experience of physical sensations. But we also can start to receive sound and contact with the eye sensitivity, smelling, taste, recognizing them all as having a basis in materiality, in the body sensitivities. And recognizing them as such. We will often encourage this relationship of primary attention with the experience in the body, whether it's the sensations throughout or in a more narrow field like the hands, or the abdomen as the breath moves in and out. And there's a particular power, force of attention that can be very supportive when we're able to have a sense of concurrent attention with something over even just a few moments. The rising of the breath or the falling of the breath. A groundedness of attention. This mind that's adaptable but also firm in its connection. And so this is always an encouragement just to feel what it's like to try to stay with this range of experiences in the body as they change, transform. Develop this sense of trust between the mindfulness and the physical experiences of the body. Always moving, always changing. But of course, other experiences arise in our field of awareness. And rather than shut the door on them, or deny or reject them, there's always this dance of how to honor them, recognize them, without getting too overwhelmed in the flood of fabrications from the other sense doors or the mind, heart. So sometimes it's simply this recognition of the other physical based sense doors, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, is still part of rupa, materiality, recognizing them as such so that they don't feel like a distant leap from the sensations of the body itself. And then recognizing everything that can happen in the field of the mind, of emotions, of knowing, of opinions, fantasies, imaginings, wantings or not wantings, all in the realm of mentality without the need to distinguish further. And so we gain this ability to simply watch the unfolding moment by moment as this play between mentality and materiality, mind and body, name and form, anchoring as much as possible in the material, staying connected, curious, caring. When objects of mentality arise, just noticing them and noting them, also changing, also momentary. Not simply that the mind is observing everything, but moments of body and mind coming and going, sequentially conditioning one another in this persistent flow. not trying to make anything happen. Just understand and observe, trying to keep up as best we can.
Thank you, Jesse, for the meditation instructions and guidance. Following from Jesse's instructions and mention of what's called the Nama Rupa Vijnana vortex, name and form and consciousness. Name being the stream of physical phenomena, form being nama being the stream of mental phenomena, rupa being the stream of physical phenomena, all the sensations we feel, as well as colors and sound and fragrances and so forth. And vijnana, another word for chitta, consciousness or discernment. And it's called a vortex because of they create each other because of the nama rupa stream, the physicality, mentality, intertwined stream, and the influence they have on each other. That is a basis for consciousness to arise. That knowing faculty of our personality. And it's because of consciousness, this knowing faculty of our personality, that nama and rupa come to being. Name are the mental formations and the phenomenology of our physicality. They come into being because of consciousness. So it's a very distilled description of the codependent arising that kind of spreads it out a little more. But it's one of the portals that, if we understand correctly, the constancy of becoming and repeating our experience again and again, over and over, kind of like Groundhog Day, we start to see through that more and more clearly and gain wisdom from it. At the same time, grow compassion for that process. Sometimes the compassion is actually an appreciation that we have this relatively working physical, mental phenomena, intertwined streams, and the consciousness that knows things and that nurtures, gives nutriment to those streams. At other times, the insight is the felt sense of growing weary of the continuous becoming. I'll mention that a little more. The subject of today's talk is on ebbs and flows. This time of year, the seasons, I'm sure where all of you are here in Hawaii as well, changing temperature, changing winds, changing ocean. Last week we had flash flood warnings, even for the area where I live and where Michelle and Jesse are, that are normally drier. We all got alerts for flash floods on both islands. And how quickly that can change, how I can feel cold. It kind of shut the windows, put on long sleeves, and then later on in the night, I'm sweating, I'm hot, and I need to have a little airflow, open the window. So externally, we're going through the seasonal change, and we're also about to enter yet another year of the pandemic that has kind of enveloped the world and gripped the beings, the people, and the animal populations of the planet, kind of all within this transitional stage. The word liminality is a word often used in anthropology and in psychology. It's like a betwixt and between, neither here nor there. And sometimes we know it as, we're not quite sure if we feel this or that, like in regard to the 8 worldly conditions. Is this painful or pleasurable? Is this a gain or a loss? Is this is this my shame karmic knot, or is it my worthiness coming to be? You know, all the play of opposites and the friction of their tension arc at play. So both the season and the condition of the worldly condition that we've been in for a couple of years now, and also internally when we do practice, we notice the ebbs and flows, the tides in running out, or the mental states disappearing, ebbing, we hope, are the difficult mental states, greed, hatred, delusion, and all their relatives, and flow, where we feel filled with kindness, with care, with appreciation, with the balance and stability of equanimity, with an insight, awareness that lets us yet again understand something we've been understanding again and again over many, many years in a slightly different way. So we have a little more confidence and the responding loving kindness that comes with these insights. So when we internalize the ebb and flows, we also find the internal betwixt and between, the liminal states, as we transition from one place to another, from sort of ordinary consciousness dropping into a meditative stream that's more focused, more attention is more gathered. Samadhi literally means perfectly put together. That is, all the disparate streams of mentality and formations and feelings kind of flow together in a directed and connected, focused stream. And that feels like a non-ordinary or a betwixt and between space, a liminal space. Some external examples that might help, like a hallway in your house is a betwixt and between space. It's a liminal physical space, a parking lot, a rest stop. All just look around or let your awareness move through where you spend your day. And you'll recognize a lot of these external liminal spaces. And they can sometimes accent, complement, or affirm the interior liminal spaces. Because of our practice, most of the liminal spaces we experience are directly related to when we are ebbing and flowing. And so when we're flowing in loving kindness, for example, it's a powerful liminal space. The Buddha spoke of loving kindness as even the whiff of a scent of loving kindness, is more powerful than like 10,000 acts of generosity. Some example like that he gave. So powerful, just a nano or micro moment of metta, of loving kindness. We can't imagine its full effect in the universe and around us, and the immediate shift in our personality with that metta moment. Gradually, we may start to get a sense of it when we see how we're relating different to things that used to aggravate or trigger an anger response. It just seems to have disappeared, or we notice it in others who are practicing meditation, loving kindness, and insight. Their actions and activities and their ways of communicating seem to have shifted. They seem to have gone through a transitory space, a liminal space. So if we appreciate these liminal spaces inside, they won't confuse us. Because often we're left thinking, well, what's happening? Is this right or is this wrong? Am I doing this? And we struggle for some conceptual clarity of what's happening when there is none, and when there's not meant to be a conceptual clarity of what's happening. It's just ambiguity. So ambiguity is often a part of liminality, a liminal space, neither here nor there, but betwixt and between. And to allow that, to trust that process, not try to change it or oppose it or fight it, is trusting the Dhamma activities themselves, that it kind of knows what to do. We hear the instructions, from Jesse when we try to connect with the Nama Rupa streams, the mentality stream and the physicality stream, and try and have a sense of their influence, cause and effect influence on each other. A happy mental state often causes a pleasant physical state, and vice versa. A pleasant physical stream of sensations running up our chest or spine will often create internal, non-sensual Dhamma joys and pleasures of mind. And then we also begin to see, as Jesse mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the impact of consciousness or discerning mind that knows phenomena and knows the nature of the Nama Rupa streams, understands them, and then to start to having a sense of what is meant by the vortex created between the Nama Rupa streams being a basis for consciousness to arise, the knowing mind to arise, and for consciousness to be a condition for the Nama and Rupa to appear. And they're all appearing moment to moment. They're ebbing and flowing moment to moment, quicker than we ordinarily can see. So another liminal space is when suddenly, from concentration and balanced energy and enough equanimity, there's a convergence of mindfulness, that pre-verbal awareness, and wisdom. And that convergence becomes insight awareness. And so for just a nano moment, we sense, oh yes, this which I call me or myself or mine are these streams of phenomena very quickly appearing, influencing each other, body and mind stream, and then the knowing consciousness that understands and sees how they work. That's like a liminality space. So out of ordinary space and time. Liminality is a non-ordinary space and time. Insight is a non-ordinary space and time. Kind of gone beyond it. Those metta moments, even the whiff of a scent of metta, we can feel suddenly seized by it, in a good way. It's like, what just happened? And it's like every cell of the body is momentarily being bathed in compassion. in care for right down to the most atomic minutia of the body. That's the effect of a moment of compassion. That's the effect of even the whiff of a scent of kindness on this mind-body, on this nama-rupa system, and the consciousness that knows it. It doesn't necessarily change what we do because we're not trying to do anything. We can't affect, we can't decide, all right, I'm going to just let go now. That letting go happens by nature of the Dhamma itself. So for example, how we begin to understand these ebbs and flows and work with the ebbs and flows in ways that can be effective on our lives and improve our lives and others' lives, is to realize the value and sacredness of the shelter we create, the seclusion we create when we pick up a meditation practice. At any time, whenever we decide to be mindful, we enter the shelter of seclusion. Viveka is the Pali term that also means the deepest rest and most profound relaxation, because it's from that very liminal, gentle space that we see the anicca nature of things. Without the protection of that shelter, that seclusion, that solitude, there won't be a convergence of awareness and wisdom that really knows, tastes from the inside of an anicca moment, a fleeting moment of impermanence, and understands it. That's a liminal moment. We can't force it. We can't make it happen in any way. And yet, that's what happens when we settle in to a meditative posture, when we settle into sitting, to standing, when we settle into just walking, nothing else, pure walking, pure contact of the foot in the ground, the movement of the leg, the pulling and pushing and so forth. That's flow of movement, the body displacing space. There's the intention and movement, and that's all there is. Everything else is extra. Everything else is the briars of conceptuality, proliferation. So if we settle into this sacred space of viveka, this deep rest, and we see anicca nature, dukkha nature, anatta nature, then we also begin to understand that dynamic, that vortex of nama rupa and consciousness, their play, one each creating the other, each nurturing the other. And at times with such clarity and depth that there grows within a Dhamma emotion of dispassion or disenchantment. Very powerful, very transitional moment, a betwixt and between moment where the dispassion is a favorable emotion. That is, we don't feel depressed. Depression and disenchantment are very different. And dispassion doesn't mean we lose our verve, our vitality, our connection, our fire, aliveness. It means the Pali word is viraga, which is the opposite of clinging lust, raga. So viraga is when we sort of have settled back, we're understanding how this becoming is so continuous, like nonstop input, the weariness, the weight of our thinking patterns, going over things again and again. Why do I think that way? Why do I worry about that? Why do I go back and recount all these things? So all the ways in which our mental formations have formed these grooves in the record of our mental formations that are tiring. When we recognize that with that convergence of awareness and insight, we don't get depressed, we get disenchanted. We grow this emotion of dispassion and then settle back more into that relaxed state. It's not that we go indifferent. There's a lot of equanimity there, which is not indifference, which is very alive, very connected. It's touching the truth. And so that viraga is an extremely valuable, transitory, liminal progression or transformation in our practice. And without any warning, without any intention, without any control or manipulation, suddenly there's a sense of the nirodha element, of the cessation, where for a moment that nama rupa stream and vijnana or consciousness stream, their vortex stops. It stops in the sense that we see it so clearly, there's no identification with it. There's no self-referencing. There's no adding a sense of I or me or mine to the story of becoming. The next moment of, well, who am I? What am I going to be? Or what am I going to do? I mean, that's the practical outcome of the nama-rupa streams and the consciousness, the vortex, continuously creating this sense of becoming. Becoming what? Well, whatever we imagine. I want to be this, I want to be that. I want to be better, I want to be more kind. Those can be powerful and lofty intentions. And when they arise out of wisdom and true compassion, they are effective. But when they're part of just the runaway mind that is churning out what we think we should do next, what we think we shouldn't have done then, or what we think they should have done or not done, that's still being caught in an unhealthy way in that vortex, being lost in it. So the nirodha, it means literally cessation. It's when these samsaric cycles cease. So the one that Jesse was guiding us through involved the nama rupa vijnana vortex. Another one that we often talk about is when feelings condition craving. Because of the nama rupa, there's the six senses. And because of the six senses, there's contact with the object of the senses, the eye with light, the ear with sound, and so forth. And because of that contact, there's feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling tone. And because of feelings, without wisdom, without that deep retreat awareness, generally feelings will condition craving and attachment. The same kind of becoming is the vortex of the nama rupa stream, physicality, mentality, and knowing mind. With wisdom and insight, right at that moment of feeling tone, and before there's a reaction to the feeling tones arise very quickly, pass away very quickly. If there's no presence, awareness presence, then generally pleasant feeling tones trigger the pattern of attachment, craving and attachment, or aversion, or sort of delusion with neutral feeling tone. When when that convergence of awareness and insight are there and go through that portal with the feeling tones as they're arising, it knows immediately the difference between the pleasant feeling tone. If it stays with the pleasant feeling tone, it won't shift into the reactive attachment to pleasant, aversion to unpleasant, delusion or confusion with neutral. It just stays with feeling tones. So we're just introducing another entry point for understanding and compassion. For truly, when we create the shelter of rest, we wake up and stay with whatever is arising, trusting whatever is arising, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, whether we like it or don't like it, just kind of staying with it. Even if it's mostly pleasant, we will reach that viraga place of dispassion and or disenchantment, which is a very actually settling emotion in the body and in the mind. Just settle back, because there's not that frenzy of being involved with the constancy of sense input, thoughts, sounds, memories, judgments, and so forth. So there's a settling with that. And then with the Nirodha, it's because of the continuity of present time awareness continually going through these portals, whether it's the feeling tone preventing reactivity, and instead feeling tone cultivating wisdom and awareness, or the vortex of the nama rupa streams and the knowing mind and the constancy of becoming, to see or feel the cessation of those, even for a nano moment, is transitional, is a transformation where we will never be quite as caught up by greed, hatred, and delusion again. That's how valuable, that's how important that particular liminal transitory space is, to be able to see that. When pain suddenly drops away, for example, there's a cessation of the dukkha cycle, where the pain of the dukkha, physical or emotional, it drops away for whatever conditions. Sometimes our practice, we call up equanimity and compassion. Sometimes it just drops away. We don't know the conditions. And we often fail to recognize that moment of relief that happens with that cessation, because everything is ceasing every moment anyway. But when we connect the cessation with the process of becoming or not, and feeding that becoming with our greed, hatred, and delusion, when that ceases, there is a profound release. Vosaga, it's called. Vosaga is release, letting go. It's not by choice. It's not something we want to do. We don't set up, I'm going to meditate, so I'll have this Vosaga release experience. It doesn't happen that way. It happens because of the previous moments of seeing the anicca from that deep place of rest. We wake up from that shelter of not being invaded by distractions and hindrances. So the truth reveals itself, whether it's pure metta, pure loving kindness, or whether it's an pure insight into anicca nature. That is so profound. And then if we keep on that particular meditative track, we will experience that viraga, where, yeah, it's weighty and it's really tiring to have these repetitive thoughts, repetitive input of the senses, repetitive, the again and again syndrome, every moment, every day, every lifetime. And so that disenchantment is a powerful opportunity to not grasp and not feed what we were previously enchanted by like the myriad colors that pull our senses, the myriad sounds that pull our sound sense, and sensations that pull our bodies. And then the cessation moments, many of which we miss. So to remind you, even when whether it's a new pain from sitting practice or old chronic pain, those moments when they disappear for a moment or two is a really valuable opportunity to go through that portal and experience that cessation of that pain, dukkha, identification, attachment cycle, and to feel the release of that, to feel the joy of letting go. That is the result of it. Not something we do, but because of the things that came before it, the conditionality of this wisdom practice. The same happens when we take up the Brahma Viharas. In this ebb and flow period, this seasonal change, the external changes in turbulent systems, weather systems, and the internal turbulent systems. It's just a really good opportunity, for example, to call up the Brahma Viharas in exactly the same way, to recognize their ebbs and flows. Ebbing when we're caught up in the world, in traffic, in shopping, in the season, the duties of the season. We've got to get this done and we've got to get that done, and how we may grow a bit uptight around all of that. Instead, we just recognize when those qualities are there, the floods, they call them. The floods are, there's many of them, but one set of the floods are attachment to sensual desire and attachment to doing practice a certain way, usually called the rites and rituals. If it's not done this way, it won't work. And thirdly, attachment to views and opinions. And we know that by the way we have conversations with ourselves or with other people, where we really feel that the body tightening, gripping, repelling itself, contracting around a view or opinion that we hold, or that we're trying to convince someone else of, or that we're opposing in someone else. When we recognize that the Buddha listed this as one of the floods, attachment to views and opinions are a major obstacle and a major way of staying caught up in this cycle of becoming, this epicenter of samsara, which is right here in the heart, not out there. And lastly, the flood of the idea of a separate, solid, permanent self, attachment to that, attachment to self, not seeing this extraordinary process that we are. It's just this nama rupa streams and the stream of consciousness that's knowing experience. When we're in that mode, when we can step into that stream of liminality and be comfortable with that, being neither here nor there, but being betwixt and between, or at ease in the liminality of that understanding, then it's a moment of liberation. It's the same as an arahant, a fully liberated being who doesn't react to conditioned things, because the arahant is no longer creating conditionality, no longer creating the conditions for greed, hatred, and delusion. So she or he acts just like the rest of us do, but without the floods interfering. The arhat has been freed of the flood of attachment to sense pleasures and to doing practice in a rigid way, rites and rituals, and to attachment to views and opinions, whether they're our own or others, with the reactivities that come from that, and with attachment to a sense of a separate, solid ego entity, unchanging ego entity from which we try continually to control experience. So free of those floods. How? Just by following the instructions that Jesse gave today, settling in, knowing the posture from within the posture, knowing what our anchors are, being able to feel the processes, the dhatus, that is the elemental nature, earth element of textures, water element of fluidity and cohesion, heat element of rising vapor, and air element of pressures and vibrations. That's it. That's body. Nothing else. That is the body. Nothing else is the body, except in our imagination. And then to understand the play of mental formations and what influences them, how powerful moments of mindfulness, moments of going into our solitude, seclusion, moments of that sort of disenchantment. Oh, okay, it's just this again. That would be like when we say that to ourselves with an evenness of heart, that is a moment of viraga. And we've let go a little bit of our clinging to being enchanted by life and by phenomena. And then to really recognize with awareness those cessation moments where the cycle has stopped. And for a moment, it's like we take a full breath. So I'm going to end on taking full breaths. I've mentioned before, I go to this Pilates classes, this Pilates class with a teacher who was a New York ballet dancer and a New Zealand champion weightlifter, Pilates teacher, and an anatomy person, whatever that's called. And when she works with me, she's always describing what's happening, or she's pulling out one of her anatomy books, or she very quickly draws, a whole skeletal muscular system. And so, I might be there bench pressing some weights, and she's telling me the muscles that are being used from my ankles all the way up through my pelvis, up through my neck, and like to the top of my head. And by the time I finish, she's drawn it all out and shows me pictures of that. So lately, she's been having me do these exercises of kind of lifting up and forward the upper rib cage. And I finally understood why she was doing that just a couple of days ago. And tomorrow I go in for a procedure in my heart where they put this little miniature parachute in part of the heart that prevents blood clots from connecting. And therefore, it really diminishes both the possibility of a stroke, but it also cuts out the need for blood thinners. And because I'm so active in oceans and reefs and surfing and gardening and whatnot. I don't want to be on blood thinners. It really affects the quality of my life. So she's been working on me getting ready for this procedure. And she turned a page in her anatomy book, but she has about 30 of them, but one I had never seen before. And in this one, the heart was just hanging like a trapeze artist in the middle of the chest, held together by these like trapeze-like ropes. The heart just hangs by these tissues that look like trapeze ropes. And it's still protected, but it's not resting on anything. It's able to move and to function at its best. It's like a trapeze pumping station. And this big dome of the chest is empty. It's like a cavernous dome with these cables hanging down and this art piece in the middle of it. That's our heart. And that image went into me so deeply, so profoundly, so transformatively, that every day I have that image. It's almost hauntingly beautiful and profound, and intricate. I can't get the image out of my mind. And so, when I breathe and make space in my upper chest, like she's been wanting me to, and I sort of imagine, sometimes feel the heart hanging so naturally, like a piece of art or a fruit hanging from a tree, well held, well supported. By trapeze ropes, however they got them in there, I have no idea. But it's really useful. And knowing the ebbs and flows of our practice, understanding them, being able to hold the tension arc of the opposites, appreciate the difficult states when they're ebbing, when they're flowing, when they're going out, and obviously appreciate the flow of the goodness of insight, loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, as it arises and fills our being. From this simple exercise of being still, of just determining to be still when we're sitting, being still when we're standing, to be still when we're walking, be still when we're lying down. At all times, just being still, the understanding that there's no agency of control within any of that. That's an anatta insight. So we can take that first shelter, viveka, where we see anicca nature really well, and do the same with the dukkha, and do the same with the anatta, recognizing the lack of any agency in this miraculous process of body-mind, and the awakening states that propel us along the path. So that's the talk for today. And I think there's time if you have any questions for Jesse or myself about instructions, about talking, about subjects of the talk. The weather changes, the aging. Michelle turned 70 yesterday. I told her watching her change was like watching grace and gratitude manifest in her gifts to the world, her service to the world. That's how I defined aging in Michelle.
Thank you, Steve. Looks like Audrey has a question here. Let me turn off.
First of all, thank you so much, Steve and Jesse. I wondered two things. If you could talk just a little bit more about what you mean. You mentioned the word portal a few times, and I would love for that to be opened up a little bit. And then also, even though we talk about this all the time and practice it, I just wonder if I could just hear you describe metta. And I'm asking that because you contrasted it with, in a quote from the Buddha, with acts of loving kindness and just a whiff of metta. So I would just love to hear you describe metta just briefly. So thank you.
Thank you for the question. The whiff of metta simile that the Buddha used, the full body of that. He said even the whiff of a scent of metta is greater than all other states of mind, with the exception of insight into anicca, impermanence. That without the insight into the impermanent nature of things, or let's put it this way, because of our capacity to have insight into the anicca nature of all things, the purity and profundity of loving kindness is great. And that's why he said that metta is more powerful, more advantageous as a liberating emotion than all other mental states, save insight into, we could say, anicca, dukkha, anatta, into all of those portals. Those are also portals. And insight into anicca is the portal into seeing the truth that nothing is solid and permanent. And insights actually bring release from attachment and identification, from those floods I mentioned. The portals that we usually hear us talk about, maybe the most common is where in that dependent origination conditionality process, we often talk about feeling tone because it occupies that second pasture of the four mindfulness pastures: body, feelings, consciousness, and dhammas, phenomena. And the pasture of feelings, being given its own pasture, is itself significant. He could have used other things, but he used vedana, feeling tone. Why? And why is it a portal? Because normally our sort of habituated conceptual mind stream, when it likes something or when something is pleasant to the eye, the ear, the body, or the mind, wanting can arise. And that can lead to clinging to that pleasant experience, wanting more of it. And that can lead to a full-blown attachment. And so it's a portal because if we're really mindful of in the moment of the pleasant feeling tone, physical or sense door pleasantness or mental state, emotion, if we're really aware, then what happens is the mind ends up just resting, abiding, like in that viveka, shelter of rest, of being at ease. Just rest of being connected to the stream of pleasant experience that's happening. through the body door or eye or ear or emotion. And so the condition of attachment, clinging and attachment doesn't happen. Or it's loosened. By seeing that process, it's loosened. We start to really know the difference that unpleasant experience is not itself attachment. Attachment is a habit, a reaction. And in the same way, an unpleasant experience, physical or mental, is not itself aversion. Aversion is the reaction when we're not mindful. It's a response of mind, a habitual response of the mind to push away or deny the unpleasant experience. When we are at rest in that we wake up place, just observing what is and what's true here. Well, what is true, what's actually happening is these series of unpleasant experiences, physical sensations, sights, sounds, emotions, mental states. And one just continues observing the unpleasantness of that, feeling that from within the body if it's physical, or feeling it from within the heart, mind, if it's mental states and emotions. And then it just stays at rest observing unpleasantness. And the more it observes unpleasantness, the more unattached the mind becomes. And so that's a useful practice, and that's a portal. And the same with neutral feeling tone. If we don't know what that is and see the truth of neutrality, the mind tends toward spacing out or confusion. It often happens in meditation when we go into pleasant, peaceful, concentrated states, but there's no insight. So here we're training the mind to have insight and to understand what feeling tones are. So that's why we call that a portal. I lost you. So
I think
there you are.
she unraised her hand, so she
Is
went.
that
She
that-
disappeared.
oh.
Audrey is there. She's
Sorry.
around. Yeah, no, that's okay.
Thank you so much, Steve.
all right?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Answered your question?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
I might just like point out that Steve's use of that word portal, how fundamental it is to this Vipassana practice, and like it's like you can see how many places he uses that word to mean around many different contexts, but around the same thing of like with this mind state or this experience is a portal for this next experience given the condition that was present beforehand. So this quality of Vipassana practice, not just in like knowing what's happening in the present moment, but starting to see the way in which whatever was previously occurring with this present moment experience as a condition leads to what is the portal for what is really at the essence of so much of the direction of the practice, really is like understanding this portalness of each moment, of how given what conditions what experiences can be expected to arise. And with the beautiful conditions or the unskillful ones, and the complexity of that is vast, but the basic method of that, just to point out that the way Steve is using it is, that also has this sort of fundamental quality of understanding how is whatever's happening right now a portal for what's happening next. That whatever happens next isn't just some random occurrence, that it's rooted in what's happening now and what happened in the previous moment. And so understanding that conditionality is really fundamental. Thomas. Let's see, can you unmute there?
Can you hear us, Thomas?
Yeah, yes, Thomas Cummings, yes. But we can't hear you. You're gonna have to unmute, and I can't. There you go.
Oh,
Great.
hi.
Excellent.
I had no question.
You just went through the
Somehow the hand
portal.
was raised, but yeah, it could be that automatic raising thing. But much gratitude, much aloha. Wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Now, how do I mute?
Let's see. Here we go. And James, to the next portal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful for these sessions. So I'm finding that increasingly I have fewer and fewer things to look forward to. And it's very analogous to what I found on some of the retreats. If I've been on a meditation retreat for a week and a half or 2 weeks or whatever, you know, first I'll stop looking forward to meals as much. And then I'll stop looking forward to Dharma talks as much. And then I'll stop looking forward to being able to go to bed at night. And pretty soon it all becomes sort of one cycle. And I think maybe partly because of the pandemic, my whole life has kind of sort of flattened out like that. And maybe in some sense of that way, that's positive in the sense of being more equanimous or something like that, or less passionate. But it's also difficult to me because I kind of look for, I have my mind, I tend to look forward to that next thing. Like I'm putting up with this moment so I can get to that next moment. And when that next moment really is sort of, when it starts to all blur together, I don't have that. I'm just sort of, what do you think of that? And how do I sort of practice and live with that and stuff? I hope I'm making sense.
Perfect sense. Jesse? Nicole?
Yeah, I'll start, and I'm sure Steve can add more. I think it's perfect sense and a really fundamental and important question always, and especially now. I mean, I think that there's probably elements of what you said that a lot of folks share, and some experience of that, and in some ways it speaks to what Steve was saying of this betwixt and between of like, is this hopelessness or is this equanimity? Right? And where are those things related to one another or not? And I think even that sense of like looking forward to experience as so much of what kind of motivates us, and then when that doesn't happen, you see that it's like, oh, you also were looking forward to things, and that you don't have that even, right? So like there's this sort of like sense of loss in the experience, and I mean, I think, there's a lot of ways to go with it. I think that it's important to be that what you're doing of like recognizing it, of understanding that there are aspects of it that feel more liberated and that feel very clear and wise. Other aspects of it that feel questionable, right? Like, is this destabilizing and is this depression, and where are those kind of, and it's like this sense of a liminal space and wanting to be clear, and where do we trust the exploration as well, right? And this sense of like, oh, what is it like to not really know, and what is it like to not have these familiar frameworks of stabilization that we go through and use, and the places where that's like helpful and liberating, and is rooted in a deeper security of wisdom versus the kind of feeble but sometimes practical stability of like finding security in sense pleasure, right? Of something positive, something exciting, something good happening next, and this sense of, just as Steve was explaining, a big part of this letting go, right, and the disenchantment is that the mind, in a natural way, because it has gone through the contractions and pulls and the agonies of the heart in and out so much, the heart stops expecting satisfaction through pleasant experience, right? It stops wanting to put itself through that kind of turbulence of wanting, of clinging, of attaining, and then losing, and then wanting again and clinging. It's like that exhaustion of that cycle becomes something the mind stops wanting to kind of grab onto. And so this sense of letting go of that wanting, letting go of those patterns as a place of deep rest and of peace and of relief. But on the other hand, it's very unfamiliar, right? That peace and the stability of that might not always feel stable, right? That it comes and goes, and this ebbs and flows, that Steve was talking about. This sense of, well, that in some ways it's really just a matter of like being sensitive to it, right? When does it feel liberated and feel like this is actually okay? It's okay. And this okayness is very powerful. And when does it have a flavor of aversion? When does it have a flavor of despondency, right? Of like kind of negative future thought that can look and feel sometimes like kind of peacefulness or disenchantment, but it's a kind of a cynicism towards the future. Oh, I'll never be happy, or no one will ever. Da, 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 I'll never, etc., etc., whatever, or the world will never, etc., etc., etc. Like kind of however the ways in which like these things are on doubt that can kind of disguise themselves as renunciation or doubt or aversion, or sort of despondency that can disguise itself as disenchantment, and to just be careful about it, right? In the sense of like, oh well, maybe if you get a sense of like, oh, this actually doesn't feel peaceful, it starts to feel like a more negative sort of mindscape, right? A little more clouded. It doesn't feel like this is actually clear seeing. I don't feel that sort of peace of that. It feels a little bit more painful. Where might there be places where it's like, oh, there's sadness, right? There's grief. There's grief about a loss of hope. There's grief about a loss of sense of goodness in ourselves or in the world. And that maybe that grief is something that might be very subtle, but is something we can relate to with a little bit of tenderness, right? A little bit of kindness. Again, we're coming back into like the clarity around what's happening in the present moment, and the subtlety of that can help us form a more appropriate response, right? The more appropriate portal to like, well, actually, the tenderness, the kindness, the compassion for the sense of loss, the compassion for the what we might have feel like we've lost in ourselves around joy, and the lack of kind of contraction around it. Oh, where is there a sense of maybe caring for the pain of that, caring for the loss, and that in itself is considered to be again a wholesome, beautiful feeling, right? The sense of, oh, wishing for the welfare of myself or the welfare of others are meant to be beautiful feelings that are pleasurable, but that are like a wholesome pleasure, right? Rooted in kind of wholesome orientation towards ourselves. So that would be my first sort of blush at it. I don't know, Steve, do you have anything else you want to add on top of that?
I think that was really helpful and very clear, and it really points to transition in your life and practice right now for all the reasons you listed. What comes to mind to me is remembering the subtle conditioning power of volition, of intention, because we can't control anything, but are out of awareness and compassion, out of wisdom and compassion, we can influence the direction of things. So we can turn all of that, as Jesse was pointing to, from a potential entanglement, or descent into greater difficulty or depression, to understanding and loving kindness and compassion and liberation through just the volition to explore. Just realizing that there's no one here that can do anything. I can't do anything about this. This is happening. And we have this chaitana, this intentional quality of the mind, a healthy chaitana when it's accompanied with wisdom and compassion. And to have that healthy chaitana with wisdom and compassion to explore all the things that you were just describing that you're going through, you'll find really useful. It gives us some sense of this is where there's some influence on the direction of life, my life or other people's life, in our projects like in Burma, just little by little with our intention to make life better for the nuns in their monasteries, or the school grades for adding on to the classroom. There's always setbacks, there's continuous setbacks, there's 25 years of setbacks, but little by little we make a change. In my own practice, all the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs I've had, still I connect with that. There's nothing more powerful than intention, whether it's the intention to love unconditionally, metta, or have compassion, or the intention to practice toward liberation. If we have that, which we do, everything else follows.
Thank you. I think that was really helpful.
Good.
Yeah. And I actually do want to say, just because I just to go with what Steve is saying, that's like to just be very careful, in particular, the sense of like, where do we start to see of how much of our, and be humbled by how much of our motivation is around some kind of sense of satisfaction, even a mental or emotional satisfaction. And what does it mean if those things aren't there, if we don't have that expectation of that, that it doesn't mean that there isn't still something important, fundamentally important about this purification process of what is motivating our actions. And is it kindness and generosity and wisdom, or is it attachment to, experience? And I think it can be a very difficult and bewildering space to be in, but so important, actually, so fundamental. Just as Steve is saying, it's like to get to this place and through this place of understanding that, like, even if we don't think there's any hope, that doesn't mean that our actions don't matter, and that it isn't actually, it matters even more, right? It purifies the depth of how much love and compassion and understanding need to be the motivation, or the only appropriate motivations for our actions. So yeah, it's an important question. Lisa.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you good.
First off, thanks to you both. Really great as always. Stephen, it was like you were speaking to me directly with the runaway mind. It's always amazing. And birthday wishes to Michelle, our dear, dear Michelle. My question is, I have somebody at work that I struggle with and really have a hard time working with this person. And I cannot wish them any sort of good metta. I feel like a bad person, but I just wondered if you could help with that. I don't wish them ill will. It's just hard to wish them anything positive. So thank you.
And my first short response, and then Jesse may add to that, is whenever you feel that dynamic, whenever you feel the tension with that person, because you're there or you're thinking about that person from home or whatever, if you can go right to that feeling and feel the feeling, especially if you can locate it somewhere in the body, to be aware of the emotion and its influence on sensations in the body. And then you have the choice to just rest in this abiding awareness of those sensations and the quality of the emotions that are arising. That's one choice I would make. A second choice is to call up compassion, to care for those difficult emotions. Leave the other person out of it for now. Completely make it about yourself. So compassion for those emotions, compassion for those sensations, just compassion for everything that you feel you have to go through, because the more you keep going over the story of it, then the, the, the tension there just increases, and you'll lose energy. And you may lose that capacity for, as Jesse was just talking about, positive intention, positive motivation. Instead, using it, how can I best use this situation that is here and I have no control over, and I can't make it go away. Here it is. What's the best use of it? Feeling the feeling, feeling the sensation, calling up compassion for it. For me, that would be a first step.
Thank you. That's very helpful already. It's like a constriction right in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right in here.
And oh, sorry, I don't want to forget. I hope your procedure goes well tomorrow.
Mhm.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I really, I think we all tend to focus on kind of where Steve landed is around people and relationships that are particularly difficult, that there's this sort of emphasis of like, of course we aspire on some level to be able to have loving kindness to our all beings and, feel the sense of graciousness and, wishing for the welfare of even people who are very difficult for us for whatever reasons, that ultimately it's to trust that the process of starting with our own pain, with our own difficult places, and finding a connection of caring to those internal experiences does expand the sort of sphere, even without volition, without intentionality, that expands towards the unpleasant in realms of the internal, external, or myself or other sort of boundary ends up getting kind of disintegrated in that eventually. But it's hard when it's someone who you work with closely, of course, and who you have to see in a regular way. And I think there are, it's really interesting if you look at the in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, the chapter on the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness and compassion, appreciative joy and equanimity. The first, I don't know, if it's 10 pages of the chapter of around loving kindness are about working with the how to do what you're saying, like how to work with the people who we think of as our enemies, and how to work with individuals who inspire a lot of anger or frustration or difficult emotion with us. So this is it's like even that should be a reflection on how taxing this is for us all, right? And how fundamental the challenges of it are. And I won't go into all of them, but there are various reflections that some are more sort of mystical or some are less. So I think sometimes that has been helpful for me at times is because it's been verified, is starting to see or just recognize that they're like whatever the negative, the judgments, the emotions and impulses that I have toward this person. Sometimes we would, if we knew the person and we knew something about their lives, we'll find that there was someone who felt very similar to the way you're feeling towards them when they were little. Uh, that this is a deep pattern in their lives of behaving in a certain way that evokes people to have certain responses to them that then build those responses and kind of create these cycles. And that often when someone was young, there was someone in their life who felt the same way toward them that you do, and probably was not as conscious or careful in terms of their behavior. And so to understand the way that these cycles of behavior between people actually augment and create more hatred, more self-hatred, more tension, more animosity, is something worth considering at times, and where we have had that, right, in our own sort of dynamics can be helpful. The last thing I'll say, and again, this is really very totally depends on the conditions. But the last thing that they recommend in the Visuddhimagga around this is like give them gifts, right? Like if all of that other stuff doesn't work, like try giving them something. And not even necessarily having to feel whatever, but just see, like, I think there's something actually very powerful in that mechanism. Doesn't have to be a big deal, doesn't have to be emotion, doesn't have to be like you bring them big wrapped presents every week or whatever. Christmas time is here, and I don't know, like, are there ways in which like something can be maybe inconspicuous but start to feel like you're behaving in a generous way, that isn't requiring anything of you emotionally, but that is a practical action, and seeing to what degree that might have an impact internally or with them. But primarily protect yourself. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, good people, it's approaching the hour. We've lost a good chunk of folks already. Maybe before we lose more, it's an appropriate time to call it a day, as they say. Steve, what do you think?
I think you guys are really great. You did a wonderful meditation. You asked really profound questions. And from where we're sitting, you're all brightly shining beings of metta and compassion and wisdom. So thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.